The Arizona sun doesn't just burn, it judges. It looks at your sins and decides if you're worth the water in your canteen. In 1884, Hera Vance was judged guilty, stripped of her land, betrayed by her own blood, and left to rot in the devil's anvil. She had one bullet left in her Colt Navy revolver. She wasn't saving it for the enemy. She was saving it for herself. But just as she raised the steel to her temple, a shadow fell over her. It wasn't the Reaper. It was a warrior the history books would call a savage. But he didn't bring death. He brought a terrifying offer that would burn the territory to the ground. This is the story of how a widow and an Apache ghost declared war on the West. The heat in the Salt River Canyon possessed a physical weight, like a heavy wool blanket soaked in boiling water, pressing down until the lungs refused to expand. Hera Vance stumbled, the heel of her worn leather boot catching on a jagged piece of shale. She hit the ground hard, the grit tearing into her palms, but she didn't cry out. She had no moisture left for tears. She lay there for a moment, her cheek pressed against the burning earth, listening to the silence. It was a massive, oppressive silence, broken only by the dry rattle of wind through the creosote bush and the rhythmic thumping of her own failing heart. "Get up, Hera," the voice in her head whispered. It sounded like Elias, her late husband. "Get up, or the vultures won't wait for you to stop breathing." She forced herself to her knees, her vision swimming in sickening waves of violet and black. She looked back at the trail she had cut, a pathetic, winding line in the dust. She had been walking for 3 days since the fire, since Silas Thorne, the man who wore a sheriff's badge but possessed a demon's soul, had torched the homestead her father had built. Thorne didn't just want the land. He wanted the deed to the subterranean aquifer Elias had discovered 2 weeks before he was accidentally trampled by a spooked horse. Thorne knew the water was worth more than gold in this territory, and he knew Hera had the survey maps sewn into the lining of her heavy canvas coat. She clawed at the coat now. It was suffocating her, a heavy burden of wool and secrets. But she couldn't take it off. If she lost the coat, she lost the maps. If she lost the maps, Elias died for nothing. "Damn you, Silas," she croaked, her voice sounding like grinding stones. She staggered to a meager patch of shade beneath a twisted mesquite tree. She checked her supplies, a canteen that felt terrifyingly light, empty, a piece of dried beef hard enough to break a tooth, and the Colt Navy .36 caliber revolver. She spun the cylinder, 1 round, just 1. Thorne's trackers were good. The terrifying duo known as the O'Malley brothers were likely only half a day behind her. If they caught her, death would be a mercy she would have to beg for. Hera looked at the gun, then at the horizon, where the heat shimmer made the mountains look like they were melting. She wasn't going to make it to Fort Apache. She wasn't even going to make it to the next ridge. "I'm sorry, Elias," she whispered, raising the cold steel barrel to her temple. Her hand trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. She closed her eyes, her finger tightening on the trigger. Click. She flinched. A misfire? No, she hadn't cocked the hammer. She lacked even the strength to die properly. A shadow fell over her. It wasn't a cloud. The sky was a relentless, polished blue. This was a solid, sharp-edged shadow. Hera's eyes snapped open. She tried to swing the gun forward, but a boot, moccasined, silent, and covered in red dust, stepped on her wrist. The pressure was firm, not crushing, but enough to numb her fingers. The gun slipped from her grasp. She looked up, squinting against the glare. He stood like he was carved from the canyon rock itself. He was tall, his skin the color of burnished copper, his hair black and bound back with a strip of red cloth. He wore buckskins that had seen years of use, and a bandolier of ammunition crossed his chest, though he held a Winchester rifle loosely in one hand. Paint, black and white stripes, adorned his jawline. An Apache, a Chiricahua by the look of the moccasins. Fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her exhaustion. The stories told in the saloon in Prescott were nightmares made flesh. They said the Apaches would peel the skin from you while you were still screaming. "Do it," Hera hissed, defiant to the end. "Be quick about it." The warrior didn't move. He didn't shout a war cry. He didn't raise a knife. He simply watched her, his dark eyes unreadable, devoid of the hatred she expected. He looked curious, like a wolf observing a wounded deer that refused to lay down. He knelt, his movement fluid, causing Hera to flinch back against the trunk of the mesquite. He reached out, not for her throat, but for the canteen lying in the dust. He shook it, confirming it was empty. Then he did something impossible. He unslung a water skin from his shoulder, uncorked it, and held it out to her. Hera stared at the dripping leather. "Poison?" "Water," he said. The word was clear, heavily accented but English. Hera's thirst overrode her survival instinct. She snatched the skin and drank greedily. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever known. She choked, coughing, and he gently pulled the skin away. "Slow," he commanded, "or the stomach rejects it." She wiped her mouth with the back of her dirty hand, staring at him. "Who are you?" "I am Mark," he said. He picked up her revolver, checked the cylinder, and tucked it into his belt. "And you are the woman the Black Hats hunt." "The Black Hats? You mean the sheriff?" "Sheriff," Mark scoffed, a sound like dry brush breaking. "A badge does not make a man. He has no honor. He tracks you like a dog tracks a wounded cat." "They're close?" Hera asked, panic rising again. "Close enough to smell your fear." Mark stood up, looking back the way she had come. "You carry a heavy load, woman. That coat, it is too hot for this sun." Hera clutched the lapels of her coat tight. "I won't leave it." Mark looked at her hands, white-knuckled on the wool. He seemed to understand instantly that it wasn't about the temperature. "Then you will die in it," he said simply. He turned to walk away. Hera watched him go. He was her only chance, and she knew it. But trusting him was insanity. Trusting him was against everything she had been told since she arrived in the West. But then she remembered Silas Thorne's laugh as he lit the kerosene on her porch. She remembered the indifference of the townspeople who looked away. "Wait," she rasped. Mark stopped but didn't turn. I can't walk anymore," she admitted, the shame burning hotter than the sun. Mark turned his head slightly. He looked at the heavy coat, then at her broken boots. He walked back to her, looming over her small frame. He crouched down, his face inches from hers. She could smell sage and old smoke on him. "The burden you carry," he whispered, his voice low and intense. "It is not just the coat. It is the hate. I see it in your eyes." "He killed my husband," Hera said, the words spilling out. "He took my home," Mark nodded, a slow, solemn movement. "Then we are the same. He took my son." The revelation hung in the hot air between them, the Apache and the settler, bound by the same enemy. "Get up," Mark said. "I told you I can't. You must." He extended a hand. "Or the Black Hats will take your scalp and your coat. Let me carry your burden." Hera hesitated, then reached up. His grip was iron. He hauled her to her feet, and without asking, he took the heavy canvas coat from her shoulders. She panicked for a second, but he simply threw it over his own shoulder, not checking to the lining, not looking for the maps. He just took the weight. "Walk in my steps," Mark ordered. We vanish now. They didn't walk, they scrambled. Mark didn't use the game trails or the wagon roads. He took Hera straight into the rattlesnake's garden, a labyrinth of sandstone pillars and box canyons that the locals swore was haunted. Hera's lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but Mark was relentless. Every time she slowed, he would pause, waiting with the patience of a stone until she caught up. He never offered a hand again, but he never left her sight. By dusk, they were high up on a ridge, tucked into a shallow alcove concealed by scrub oak. Below them, the vast expanse of the Arizona Territory turned a bruised purple. Hera slumped against the rock wall, watching Mark. He was methodical. He took a small piece of jerky from his pouch and handed it to her, then began cleaning his Winchester. "Why?" Hera asked, chewing the tough meat. "Why help me? You could have taken the coat and left me." Mark didn't look up from his rifle. "Thorn, he calls himself Colonel now. He led the raid on my village 3 winters ago. He was not sheriff then. He was a mercenary for the mining companies." Hera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "I didn't know." "You did not look," Mark said, his tone devoid of accusation, stating it as a simple fact. "Your people see only land. They do not see the blood in the soil." Hera fell silent. He was right. Elias had been a good man, but they had fenced off the creek, ignoring the people who had watered their horses there for generations. "He killed your son?" she asked softly. Mark's hands stopped moving on the rifle. For a second, the mask of the warrior slipped, revealing a grief so profound it made Hera's heart ache. "My son was 12. He stood between the soldiers and the women. Thorn shot him." He laughed. Mark reassembled the rifle with a sharp clack. "I was away, hunting. When I returned, there were only ashes. I have hunted Thorn ever since. But he surrounds himself with many guns. I am a wolf alone. A wolf alone can kill a sheep, but he cannot kill the pack." He looked at Hera, his dark eyes piercing. "But you have something he wants. He chases you with a desperation I have not seen. He leaves the safety of the town to find you. You are the bait." Hera bristled. "I'm not bait, I'm a landowner." "You are bait," Mark insisted, "and I will use you to draw him into the trap." "So that's it." Hera stood up, her anger flaring. "I'm just a tool for your revenge." "Is that not what I am to you?" Mark countered smoothly. "A weapon to save your life." Hera opened her mouth to argue, but closed it. It was a transaction, a cold, hard transaction in the wilderness. "Fine," Hera said, "but I need that coat back." Mark tossed the bundle to her. "Keep your secrets, woman, but know this. Thorn's tracker, the one they call One-Eye O'Malley, is not a man who gives up. He is down there." He pointed a finger toward the darkening valley floor. Hera crept to the edge of the alcove and looked down. Miles away, a tiny pinprick of orange light flickered. A campfire. "They are resting," Hera whispered. "No," Mark said, moving to stand beside her. "They are not resting. They are waiting for the moon." "Why?" "Because O'Malley tracks by scent and sound better than sight. He waits for the wind to shift up the canyon. When the moon rises, they will move fast." "We have to keep moving, then," Hera said, panic rising. "No, we cannot outrun horses in the dark on this terrain. You will break a leg. We must make a stand." Hera looked at him, wide-eyed. "There are at least 4 of them. We have 1 rifle and my revolver." "We have the land," Mark said, "and we have the dark." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small leather bag. He upended it, dumping a handful of large, wicked-looking thorns onto the rock. They were mesquite thorns, but dipped in a thick, black resin. What is that? Venom of the Gila monster mixed with datura, Mark said calmly. It will not kill a man instantly, but it will make him see demons. It will make him shoot his own shadow. He looked at Hera. Can you shoot? I can hit a can at 20 paces, she said. A man is not a can. A man shoots back. Mark handed her the revolver he had taken earlier. Tonight, you do not shoot to kill. You shoot to scare. You make them think there is an army up here. You make them think the ghosts have come for them. And what will you do? Mark smiled, a terrifying expression that showed white teeth in the gloom. He pulled a long, serrated knife from his boot. I will become the ghost. The moon rose like a bleached skull over the rim of the canyon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the rattlesnake's garden. The air had cooled, but the tension radiating from the rocks felt hotter than the noon sun. Hera lay flat on her stomach behind a slab of sandstone, the Colt Navy heavy in her sweating hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Below them, the silence of the desert was broken by the clatter of shod hooves on stone. They were coming. Mark was gone. He had vanished into the shadows 20 minutes ago, melting into the rock face with a silence that seemed supernatural. Hera was alone. Keep your eyes on the trail, she whispered to herself, repeating Mark's instructions like a prayer. Shoot at the sparks. Don't let them look up. A voice drifted up from the canyon floor, gravelly, wet, and cruel. It was One-Eye O'Malley. I smell her, boys, O'Malley croaked. Smells like lavender and fear. She ain't far. The little widow thinks she can hide in the devil's pockets. Sheriff said bring her back alive, One-Eye, another voice warned. It sounded younger, probably the younger O'Malley brother, Kid Callum. Sheriff ain't here, One-Eye spat. And accidents happen in the dark. A broken leg, a pretty face cut up by rocks. Tragedy, ain't it? Hera's finger tightened on the trigger. A cold rage replaced her fear. These men weren't just hunters, they were butchers. Suddenly, a horse whinnied in terror, a high, piercing shriek that echoed off the canyon walls. Whoa! What the hell got into you? Kid Callum yelled. Thwack! A soft sound, like a finger flicking a melon. Ow! Damn bugs! A third man cursed. Something bit my neck. Hera watched from above. She couldn't see them clearly, just dark shapes shifting in the moonlight. She knew what had happened. Mark's blowgun. The mesquite thorn dipped in Gila monster venom, and datura was now in the man's bloodstream. Quiet! One-Eye roared. You hear that? Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then the man who had been stung began to giggle. It was a low, bubbling sound that escalated quickly into a manic cackle. Snakes! The man wheezed. They're wearing coats. Look at the snakes in the coats. Shut up, Deke. They're crawling on me. Get 'em off. Get 'em off. Bang! Deke fired his Winchester blindly into the dark. The muzzle flash illuminated the canyon for a split second, revealing the terrified horses and the confused men. Now, Hera whispered. She aimed at the rock wall just above where the flash had been and pulled the trigger. The Colt roared, the recoil jerking her arms up. The bullet sparked off the stone, sending a shower of granite fragments raining down on the men. Ambush! Kid Callum screamed. They're in the cliffs! Return fire! One-Eye bellowed. The canyon erupted. Bullets chipped away at Hera's cover, whining like angry hornets past her ears. She pressed her face into the dirt, waiting for the count of 5, just as Mark had told her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She popped up and fired again, this time aiming lower, near the horse's feet. Chaos reigned below. The horses, spooked by the gunfire and the smell of blood, were bucking and rearing. Deke, hallucinating wildly from the datura, was now screaming about demons eating his eyes. Then the shadows moved. Hera saw a shape drop from a ledge 20 feet above the posse. It landed silently behind Kid Callum. It was Mark. He didn't use a gun. He used the war club hanging from his belt, a heavy stone bound in rawhide. He struck with terrifying precision, a dull thud silencing Kid Callum instantly. The boy slumped from his saddle. One Eye spun around, his shotgun leveling at the Apache. "Mark!" Hera screamed. She broke cover. She stood up, exposing herself against the moonlight, and fired her last bullet. She missed One Eye, but the round struck the stock of his shotgun, shattering the wood and sending splinters into his face. One Eye roared in pain, dropping the weapon. "Witch!" he screamed, clutching his face. "I'll kill you!" Mark was on him in a heartbeat. He didn't kill him. He kicked the man in the chest, sending him sprawling into the dust, then grabbed the reins of One Eye's horse. He vaulted into the saddle with fluid grace. "Hera, jump!" Mark yelled, driving the horse up the steep incline toward her ledge. It was madness. The slope was loose shale, nearly 45 degrees. But the horse, terrified and driven by a master rider, scrambled up the rocks, hooves striking sparks. As he neared the ledge, Mark extended his arm. Hera didn't think. She threw herself off the rock, grabbing his forearm. The jolt nearly dislocated her shoulder. Mark swung her up behind him, her arms locking around his waist. "Hold tight!" He turned the horse and drove it not away from the cliff, but along the narrow ridge, a path no sane rider would take at night. Behind them, Deke was still shooting at the moon, and One Eye was cursing their names to hell. They rode until the moon began to dip, the horse foaming and blowing hard. Finally, Mark slowed to a trot, then a walk, navigating a narrow slot canyon that opened into a hidden valley. He slid off the horse and helped Hera down. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed into the sand, shaking uncontrollably. Mark looked down at her. For the first time, there was something akin to respect in his eyes. "You stood up," he said quietly. "You gave away your position to save me." Hera looked at her hands. They were covered in gunpowder and dust. "I missed." "You hit the gun," Mark corrected. "Better than a kill. You took his fangs." He sat down opposite her, the adrenaline fading into the cold blue light of pre-dawn. "Why? You could have stayed hidden. If I died, they might have ridden past you." Hera met his gaze. "A wolf alone can't kill the pack." "You said that." Mark nodded slowly. He pulled a piece of fabric from his pouch and began to wipe the war paint from his face. Without the stripes, he looked younger, but his eyes were ancient, filled with a weary sadness. "We have bought time," he said. "But One Eye will not stop. He will send word to the colonel, to Thorn." "Then we keep running," Hera said. "No," Mark said darkly. "We stop running. Tomorrow, we go to the Ghost Ridge. We go to the source of the water." "The aquifer?" Hera asked, confused. "Why? That's where they want me to go." "Because," Mark said, leaning forward, "the map you carry does not just show water. It shows where the sky touches the earth. It is a holy place, and it is where Thorn plans to build his machine." "Machine?" "A steam pump," Mark spat the word, "big enough to drain the life from this land in a year. We must destroy the site before they can bring the iron there." The morning sun revealed the brutality of the landscape. The hidden valley was a bowl of red rock and cactus, beautiful but unforgiving. Hera woke to the smell of roasting meat. Mark had snared a rabbit and was cooking it over a small, smokeless fire. He looked fresh, alert, as if he hadn't spent the night fighting demons. Hera, on the other hand, felt every bruise. She sat up, clutching her stomach, a wave of nausea rolling over her. She scrambled to the bushes and retched dryly. When she came back, Mark was watching her closely. "The sickness," he said. "It is not from the food you have not eaten." Hera wiped her mouth, her face pale. "It's the heat, the stress." "No," Mark said. He tossed a small stone into the fire. "I have seen women with that look. My wife, before the soldiers came." He looked at her stomach, concealed beneath the dirty dress and the oversized coat she had reclaimed. "You carry 2 lives, Hera Vance." The secret hung in the air, heavier than the canyon heat. Hera slumped against a rock, defeated. She hadn't even told Elias before he died. She had wanted it to be a surprise for his birthday. Now, it felt like a curse. "Yes," she whispered, tears finally leaking from her eyes. That's why I couldn't give up. That's why I need the land. I have nothing else to give this child." Mark stared into the fire. The revelation shifted the ground between them. She wasn't just a widow seeking revenge. She was a mother fighting for survival. In Apache culture, the protection of the future generation was the highest law. "This changes the hunt," Mark said softly. "Thorn, if he knew. He'd kill us both without blinking," Hera said, bitterfly. "Thorn works for the Santa Fe ring. You know them?" Mark's head snapped up. "The ring?" "My husband found out before he died," Hera explained, her voice gaining strength. "Thorn isn't just a corrupt sheriff. He's on the payroll of Thomas Catron and the Santa Fe ring. They're buying up all the water rights in the territory to force the ranchers out. They want a monopoly." Mark's expression darkened. The Santa Fe ring was a cabal of powerful lawyers and politicians who controlled the territory through bribery and violence. They were the ones who manipulated the army into moving Mark's people to the reservations. They were the true architects of his misery. "Catron," Mark hissed the name. "The spider in Santa Fe." "Elias found the aquifer," Hera continued, "but he also found something else. The survey markers, they were old, Spanish, and beneath them he found Apache markings." She reached into the lining of her coat. Her fingers trembled as she ripped the stitching. She pulled out the oilskin packet and unfolded the map. It wasn't a standard surveyor's map. It was hand-drawn, overlaid on an old military chart. She pointed to a spot marked with a red symbol, a jagged lightning bolt. "Here," she said. "Ghost Ridge. Elias said there was a cave there. He said the water flows up from the ground." Mark looked at the map, and his face went ashen. He reached out and touched the paper reverently. "The breath of the mountain," he whispered. "It is the place where the Garn dancers go to speak to the spirits. It is the most sacred place in the Dragoon Mountains." He looked at Hera, his eyes burning. "If they put a pump there, if they drill into the heart of the mountain, they will kill the spirit of the land. The water will turn bitter. The people will die." "They're bringing the machinery from Tucson," Hera said. "Elias saw the invoices. That's why Thorn killed him. Elias was going to file a claim to protect the land as a heritage site, using an old treaty law." Mark stood up, pacing the small camp. The scope of the war had just expanded. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about preventing a sacrilege that would destroy his people's history and the settlers' future. "We cannot just destroy the site," Mark said, stopping abruptly. "If we blow up the cave, we might crush the water source ourselves. Then what do? "We cut the head off the snake," Mark said. "We do not run to the mountain. We go to the crossroads. We wait for the wagon train carrying the pump." "That's suicide," Hera argued. "It'll be guarded by half the territory." "No," Mark corrected. "It will be guarded by Thorn. He wants the glory. He wants to be the one to deliver the water to the ring. He turned to Hera. You said you carry a burden. I said I would carry it. But now you must be strong. For the child. He walked over to his horse and pulled a long, leather-wrapped bundle from the saddlebags. He unrolled it to reveal a Sharp's buffalo rifle, a massive, long-range weapon capable of dropping a bison at 1,000 yards. Can you shoot this? He asked. Hera looked at the heavy gun, then at her stomach, then at Mark. If I have to, she said. Good, Mark said, because I am going to make you the most dangerous thing in the West. What's that? A mother with a rifle, Mark said grimly. We ride for Dead Man's Pass. The wagon comes in 2 days. We will be there to greet it. And the O'Malleys? Let them come, Mark said, mounting his horse and pulling Hera up behind him. They are chasing a widow. They do not know they are chasing a storm. Dead Man's Pass lived up to its name. It was less a pass and more a wound in the earth, a narrow, twisting defile between sheer cliffs of red granite that rose 400 feet straight up. The floor of the pass was choked with scree and dust, barely wide enough for a freight wagon. It was a natural kill box, a place where the Apache had ambushed Spanish lancers 2 centuries prior. Hera lay prone on a high precipice, overlooking the northern entrance of the pass. The stone beneath her was scorching, radiating heat through her thin dress. The heavy Sharp's buffalo rifle rested on a rolled-up blanket in front of her. It was a beast of a weapon, 50 caliber. The cartridges were the size of her fingers. The recoil, Mark had warned, would feel like a mule kicking her shoulder. Breathe. Mark's voice drifted down from the rocks above her. He was invisible again, a sentinel hidden in the crags, watching the southern approach. Hera closed her eyes, trying to steady her hands. The nausea was back, a rolling sickness in her gut that competed with the terror, stopping her heart. She thought of the child growing inside her, a spark of life in the midst of so much death. For Elias. For the baby. They had spent the previous day preparing. Mark had taught her the language of long-range killing, how the shimmering heat haze distorted distance, how the wind swirling in the canyon could push a heavy lead bullet 3 feet off course at 500 yards. They come, Mark signaled. Hera opened her eyes and looked down the brass scope of the Sharps. At first, she saw only shimmering heat waves. Then, the dust cloud appeared, a thick, choking brown smudge against the blue sky. Out of the dust emerged the vanguard, not sheriff's deputies. These men wore long linen dusters and rode tall, well-fed horses. They carried repeaters across their saddles. Mercenaries, Mark whispered, suddenly appearing beside her, making her jump. Pinkertons, perhaps. Hired guns from Denver or St. Louis. The ring does not trust local talent for this shipment. Hera swallowed hard. How many? 20 riders, and the wagons. The freight train rumbled into view. It was massive. 12 oxen strained against the yokes of the lead wagon. On the flatbed, covered by heavy canvas tarp but unmistakable in its bulk, was the steam pump boiler. It looked like a sleeping iron dragon strapped to wood. Behind it, a second wagon carried crates, dynamite, coal, tools, and riding alongside the lead wagon, looking imperious in a black suit covered in dust, was Colonel Silas Thorne. Even from this distance, Hera recognized the arrogant tilt of his head, the way he sat his horse like a king surveying conquered territory. "He is mine," Mark said. The words were colder than ice. "The riders are yours. The boiler is the priority." "If I shoot, they'll pinpoint us in seconds," Hera whispered, her throat tight. "Yes, they will look up. And when they look up, they do not look down." Mark pointed to the canyon floor. Hera saw it then. He had been busy during the night. A thin tripwire, invisible against the dust, stretched across the narrowest point of the pass, just below their position. It led to a bundle of dynamite taped beneath a precarious overhang of loose rock. "The trap is set," Mark said. "Wait for the lead oxen to cross the shadow of the Hawk Rock." He pointed to a distinctive beak-shaped outcropping. "Then you strike the match." He squeezed her shoulder, a brief, rough gesture of solidarity, and melted back into the rocks, heading down toward the canyon floor to be ready for the close-quarters carnage. Hera was alone again. The silence stretched. The grinding of the wagon wheels grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. She could hear the curses of the drivers, the cracking of whips. She watched through the scope. The crosshairs danced. Her breath was ragged. The lead oxen plodded forward, their heads down. They stepped into the shadow of the Hawk Rock. Now. Hera inhaled sharp and deep, holding the breath to still her body. She didn't aim for a man. She aimed for the lead ox on the left. To stop the train, you kill the engine. She squeezed the trigger. The roar of the Sharp's rifle was deafening in the confined space. It wasn't a bang. It was an atmospheric detonation. The recoil slammed into Hera's shoulder with bone-jarring force, knocking the wind out of her. Dust and smoke obscured her vision instantly. Below, chaos erupted. The heavy .50 caliber slug struck the lead ox right between the shoulders. The massive beast dropped mid-stride, as if poleaxed, dragging the ox yoked beside it, down into the dust. The momentum of the massive freight wagon shoved forward, the tongue buckling, and the wagon jackknifed violently, slamming into the canyon wall with the screech of tortured wood and metal. The pass was instantly blocked. "Ambush! High right! The cliffs!" Thorne's voice bellowed over the din. The mercenaries were professionals. They didn't panic, they reacted. 20 rifles swung upwards toward Hera's smoke plume. Bullets began to smack against the granite face of the cliff, sending razor-sharp shards of rock spraying over her position. Hera rolled onto her back, reloading the break-action rifle with trembling hands. She shoved another massive cartridge in, snapped it shut, and slithered to a secondary firing position 10 feet to her left, just as Mark had taught her. Below, the mercenaries were dismounting, using their dead horses and the wagon for cover, pouring fire at the ridge. Then, the second trap sprung. Mark, hidden in a fissure near the canyon floor, fired his Winchester. The bullet severed the taut tripwire. A heartbeat later, the dynamite bundle beneath the overhang detonated. Boom! The explosion was small, just enough to destabilize the rock face. A cascade of boulders, some the size of whiskey barrels, rained down onto the second wagon, the one carrying the explosives and fuel. The canyon turned white. The secondary explosion was cataclysmic. It vaporized the rear wagon, sent men flying like rag dolls, and ignited the canvas covering the steam boiler on the front wagon. The sleeping iron dragon was now wreathed in flames. The concussive wave hit Hera hard, pressing her flat against the stone. Her ears rang with a high-pitched squeal. Through the smoke, she saw Thorne. He had been thrown from his horse, but was on his feet, his suit torn, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. He was screaming orders that no one could hear. He looked up, his eyes wild, scanning the ridge, and for a split second, through the scope, their eyes met. Recognition dawned on his face. A twisted smile broke through the blood. "Hera!" he roared, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. "You bitch! You didn't burn!" He raised his own rifle, a gleaming Henry repeater, and began firing rapidly at her perch. Hera flinched back as rounds buzzed past her head like angry bees. She needed to take the shot. She needed to end him. She rolled out, leveling the Sharps. She had him in the crosshairs. His chest filled the brass circle. Click! A misfire. The cheap army surplus ammunition Mark had scrounged was unreliable. Hera cursed, frantically cracking the breech to clear the dud round. "Gotcha now, little bird." The voice didn't come from below. It came from behind her. Hera froze. The smell of stale tobacco and unwashed body hit her before she turned. It was One-Eye O'Malley. Half his face was a ruined mess of dried blood and splinters from where her bullet had shattered his shotgun stock 2 nights ago. The remaining eye glared with homicidal fury. Beside him stood his brother, Deke, looking pale and twitchy, still shaking off the effects of the datura poison. "We tracked the Apache's horse spoor," One-Eye growled, leveling a new sawed-off shotgun at her chest. "Figured he'd try something stupid like this. Didn't figure on you being the shooter." Deke nervously licked his lips, eyeing the massive Sharps rifle in her hands. "She ain't bad with that buffalo gun, One-Eye. Maybe we should just shoot her." "Shut up, Deke. The Colonel wants her alive. He wants the map." One-Eye stepped closer, the massive bore of the shotgun looking like a canyon entrance itself. "Drop it, girlie. Nice and slow. Or I'll blow that baby you're hiding right out of your belly." Hera's breath hitched. He knew. Below, the gunfire had slackened. Mark was down there, moving like a phantom through the smoke, finishing off the mercenaries with his knife and war club. He didn't know she was compromised. "I said drop it!" One-Eye roared, racking the slide of the shotgun. Hera's mind raced. She held the heavy Sharps rifle across her chest. It was useless at this range against 2 men. She was trapped on a narrow ledge, 400 feet up, with 2 psychopaths. She looked at One-Eye, then down at the boiling chaos in the canyon, then back to One-Eye. A strange calm settled over her. It was the calm of someone who had already lost everything and found they had one thing left to spend. "You want the map?" Hera said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Come and get it." And with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she didn't drop the rifle. She swung it. She used the massive 14-pound steel barrel of the buffalo gun like a baseball bat, putting every ounce of her pregnant body into the swing. The barrel connected with One-Eye's bad side, smashing into his already ruined face with a sickening crunch. The impact fired the shotgun into the air, the blast deafening them all. One-Eye screamed, staggering backward towards the sheer edge of the cliff. Deke yelped and lunged for Hera, tackling her around the waist. They hit the hard stone together, rolling towards the precipice, a tangle of limbs and skirts and dust, fighting silently on the edge of the abyss while the battle raged below. Deke O'Malley was younger and stronger, but the datura poison still swam in his veins, making his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He grappled with Hera, his fingers digging into her arms, trying to throw her off the ledge. Hera didn't fight his strength. She fought his balance. As he shoved her backward toward the abyss, she dropped her weight, hooking her leg behind his knee. It was a move Elias had taught her playfully in the kitchen, never imagining she would use it to kill a man. Deke stumbled. His boots slipped on the loose shale. His eyes went wide, the pupils blown black from the poison. He grabbed at her dress, the fabric tearing with a sharp rip. "No!" he shrieked. Hera kicked him hard in the chest. His grip failed. He teetered for a second, arms windmilling against the blue sky. And then he was gone. There was a long silence, followed by a distant, sickening crunch on the rocks far below. Hera scrambled back from the edge, gasping for air, clutching her stomach. She looked for One-Eye. The elder O'Malley was slumped against a boulder, unconscious, blood bubbling from his ruined face. He wouldn't be waking up any time soon. She dragged herself to the rim of the cliff and looked down. The battle on the canyon floor had reached its bloody crescendo. The mercenaries were dead or fled. The steam boiler was a twisted, hissing wreck of iron, venting scalding steam into the air like a dying beast. Only 2 figures remained. Mark stood near the burning wagon. He was bleeding from a gunshot wound to his left arm, blood slicking his dark skin, but he held his war club with a steady hand. Facing him, backed against the canyon wall, was Silas Thorne. The colonel had lost his hat, his fine suit was scorched, and his Henry rifle lay empty at his feet, but in his hand he held a heavy army Colt revolver. "You can't kill me, savage!" Thorne screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I am the future. I am progress. If you kill me, the ring will send an army. They will burn every tree in these mountains." Mark stepped forward, ignoring the gun pointed at his chest. "Let them come. The land eats armies. It has eaten the Spanish. It has eaten the blue coats. It will eat the ring." Thorne cocked the hammer. "Go to hell." From 400 feet above, Hera rested the heavy barrel of the Sharp's buffalo rifle on the ledge. Her hands were steady now. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline clarity. She wasn't just a widow. She wasn't just a victim. She was the mother of the next generation, and she was cleaning her house. She didn't aim for the head. She aimed for the hand that held the gun. She exhaled. For Elias. Boom! The shot echoed like the gavel of God. Down in the canyon, Silas Thorne screamed as his right hand disintegrated in a spray of red mist. The revolver went spinning into the dust. He fell to his knees, clutching his mangled stump, staring up at the impossible shot from the heavens. "Who?" Thorne gasped, shock overtaking the pain. Mark didn't look up. He knew who it was. He walked up to Thorne, looming over him like the judgment of the mountains. "You look for the ghost," Mark said softly. "But you found the woman." Thorne looked up at the Apache, tears streaming down his face. "Mercy. I have gold. I have deeds. I can give you the valley." Mark shook his head. He pulled the knife from his belt. It wasn't an act of murder. It was an act of cleansing. "You took the water," Mark said. "Now the water takes you." He didn't use the knife on Thorne's throat. Instead, he cut the belt holding Thorne's canteen. He opened it and poured the water onto the dusty ground in front of the kneeling man. Thorne watched the precious liquid, the thing he had killed for, vanish into the thirsty earth. "Leave him," Mark said to the empty air. He turned and walked away. Thorne was left alone in the burning canyon, maimed, broken, and without water, miles from civilization. The buzzards were already circling. The desert would finish what the bullet had started. 6 months later. The autumn rains had come early to the Dragoon Mountains. The rattlesnake's garden was no longer brown and dead. It was flushed with sage and wildflowers. Hera sat on the porch of the rebuilt cabin. It wasn't a grand house, but it was strong, built with timber she had cut herself. In her arms, a baby boy slept, wrapped in a blanket woven with Apache patterns, red for the earth, black for the protection of the night. She named him Elias after his father, but his middle name was Mark. The legal battle had been harder than the gunfight, but with the map and Elias's original survey logs, and a surprisingly honest judge from Tucson who had no love for the Santa Fe ring, Hera had secured the water rights. She hadn't sold them. She had placed them in a trust, a shared deed between her ranch and the local Chiricahua tribe, ensuring the water could never be dammed or drained by a mining company. She heard a twig snap. She didn't reach for the shotgun leaning against the doorframe. She knew the step. Mark emerged from the tree line. He looked different without the war paint. He wore a simple cotton shirt and denim trousers, though the moccasins remained. He carried a string of trout, fresh from the river that was now flowing freely again. He walked up the steps and nodded to the baby. "He grows strong," Mark said. "He has the lungs of a warrior." "He keeps me up all night," Hera smiled, tired but happy. just like his namesake. Mark set the fish down on the table. The O'Malleys are gone. The ring has turned its eyes to Colorado. The silence has returned. For now, Hera said, looking out over the valley. For now is enough, Mark replied. He looked at her, and the ghost of his own grief seemed to have faded, replaced by a quiet peace. He had carried her burden, and in doing so, he had laid down his own. I will be in the high country for the winter, Mark said, but the wolves will watch the house. I know, Hera said. Thank you, Mark. He paused at the edge of the porch. You did not give up, Hera Vance. That is the hardest thing. To live is harder than to die. He turned and walked back into the forest, vanishing into the shadows of the pines as silently as he had arrived. Hera rocked the baby, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and violet. The war was over. The water was safe. And for the first time in a long time, the wind didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a lullaby. And that brings us to the end of the saga of Hera Vance and Mark. What started as a desperate moment of surrender in the Devil's Anvil turned into a war that shook the Arizona Territory to its core. This wasn't just a story about gunfights and dynamite. It was about two broken souls, a grieving widow and a vengeful father, finding a way to heal by carrying each other's burdens. They defied the corrupt Santa Fe ring and proved that the spirit of the land is stronger than any steam pump or mercenary army. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most unlikely alliances are the ones that save us. Hera found her strength not in hatred, but in the love for her unborn child, and Mark found his honor not in the act of killing, but in the act of preserving the future. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think justice was truly served? Was leaving Colonel Thorne to the mercy of the desert a fitting punishment, or was it actually crueler than a bullet? If you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West, please hit that like button. It really supports the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next adventure. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next trail.